Welcome back, guys. Week 2 of the preseason is in the books, and we have dominated the Chiefs in our pseudo Super Bowl rematch. Before we get started, remember to like, comment, subscribe, turn on those notifications down below. Let's get straight into talking about what happened in that last game. We exacted revenge in Kansas City as we demolished the Chiefs by a score of 51-17, and it felt so good to get a little bit back as they bested us a few months ago. But now, let's go through the story of how this all went down. We would start with the ball, and that meant Kyler Murray would lead out the starters for the first half. And he looked much better than he did last week as he put together 200 all-purpose yards and he threw in a score as well. But our first drive would not be great as we would be forced to punt, and that meant we would see Patrick Mahomes take the field to respond. And he would put up very similar numbers to Murray, and he continued to display his incredible arm talent. His first drive would end in a punt as well, though, as it would be Khalil Mack, our ring-chasing edge rusher, who would take over early as he would get to Mahomes to drop him for a sack on third down, and he would double that sack total on the very next drive, as Mahomes would get moved off his spot by Michael Allison, and Mack would finish it off himself. Our offense would reward him as on the drive after the initial sack, it would be our lead back, Tyson Williams, who would find the edge and punch in the first score of the game to give us the early 7-point lead. The Chiefs would then try to claw back, and they would bring the ensuing drive all the way to a 55-yard field goal try, and it would be blocked by the veteran corner Jason Verrett, and this would be just the start of his incredible night as he was involved in breaking up passes all over the field. The game would then settle down a bit as both teams traded field goals, and this was when Cordell Patterson got his carries for the day. And while he only got 4, he made the most of it as he averaged near 11 on each one. Both units would then begin to evolve their receiving weapons, and we began that trend by targeting Hollywood Brown. He came away with some super special receptions and continued to show why our combination with him and Murray is one of the deadliest in the league. And that would lead us to getting down to a goal-to-go situation, and it would be none other than James Conner, who would take to the air to punch in our second touchdown of the game, but he would have an even bigger contribution to come later on. We would also end up kicking another field goal, but then KC would get the ball later in the first half, and they would focus on involving Kadarius Toney. We saw how much of an impact he had for them in the Super Bowl, and he would do more of the same today as he would go for 70 yards and he would bring in the snag to help them find their first touchdown of the game. So we would get the ball back with less than 2 minutes, and this is when James Conner would make his biggest impact as he would come back to this pass, escape Douglas, and then he would take off and sprint down the field to go for 67 yards and set us up in prime position to end the half on a high. And we would indeed end on a high as we would chew the clock down and Murray would spin out and put out a picture-perfect ball for Trey McBride. He would get on the end of it and with an amazing sideline effort would bring in our first passing touchdown of the game. We would then move into the second half, and as the backups enter the game, that meant the Chiefs would be led at QB by Jarrett Stidham. And overall, he put together a solid day as he would throw for very similar numbers to Mahomes. And his counterpart in Clayton Tune would also enter for us, and in a little over a quarter, he would throw for just over 100 yards and a score. Now, both of their initial drives would be stalled, as that is because both defenses would start to step up, and one of the guys who would be responsible would be the Chiefs' Truman Jones, who would fly in as no one picked him up off the right side to drop Tune for a sack, and he would then double his sack total in the fourth quarter as he would get home for another. Kansas City would then get the ball back, and the next man they got behind to drive them down the field would be rookie tight end Jose Person. They regularly utilized Travis Kelce effectively, and they did the same with Person, and he would end that drive by bringing in a touchdown snag to certify that backup tight end role. We got the ball back, and we wasted no time as on the very next play, we tossed up a long shot to KJ Hamler, who came away with the ball and took 80 yards to go all the way for the touchdown score to make the prior touchdown essentially meaningless. And the last statement play of the third quarter would come from our third-round pick, Bryce Harris. He would send him in on a blitz, and with some great speed and vision, he hit the hole and got to Stidham for the sack. Before we get to the remainder of this game, let's discuss the game our other two running backs had today. The pair of Sean Jones and Mark Bradford didn't get a ton of carries as they combined for only 8, but they did amazing with them as they averaged 7 yards when they touched the ball. Josh Dobbs got the remainder of the snaps for the game, and he made some incredible throws, with this one being his best as he unloaded this ball looking for Zach Pascal, beating an absolute shot in the process, but he puts it in the perfect spot in the back of the end zone for yet another touchdown to move our point total to 44. On the very next drive, we would have our own Kaiser White make a massive play as he would get home for the sack, dislodge the ball from Stidham, and it would be Cameron Thomas who would find the ball and get on top of it to secure the fumble recovery. His day would not be perfect, however, as when we drove back down the field, Dobbs would unload once more, but this time it would be the Chiefs' Brian Cook who would get on the end of this to secure the only interception of the game and give his team one more shot on offense. But after we would force a 3-and-out, we would get some big chunk plays, and a breakdown in coverage would leave KJ Hamler wide open off the left side to pick up his second touchdown to close out the game. After this game came to a close, we went back into the locker room and we had a chat with Elijah Wilkinson. And he said it's always fun seeing a rookie play their first few games at the pro level. He's picking things up quick, but he thinks he still has room to grow. And we responded by saying we agree. Keep working with him and make sure he's ready for the regular season. We need him to be as good as he can be for when the games really matter. And that meant Wilkinson will continue his work with Gary Fordham into the beginning of the regular season. We then advanced the week and we got a message from Zach Pascal, and he said he's been impressed with Amari Rodgers. This dude has all the tools he needs to be a top receiver one day, and he thinks he might be able to help. And that's an interesting development for a guy set to be on the chopping block for roster cuts. We then had some staff points to spend, so we went into the man secondary defensive coordinator talent tree, where we purchased the second tier of Seen From Afar, which will boost play rec for safeties by 1. We then met back up with Elijah Wilkinson, and he said he has continued to work with Fordham to help him with his game, and that he's coming along very nicely for a rookie. And we responded saying we are happy to hear it, and we really appreciate the time he's taken to help the kid out. Not every team has guys like him that are willing to help out the younger players, and with that, Gary Fordham received 2,500 XP. And after the very impressive performance we saw James Conner display in that last game, we understood the position he's in. Being older at a loaded position for us, with him being better cap-wise to not be on the roster. We assessed his trade value from around the league, and as expected from a 29-year-old running back, no one had real interest. So in my mind, it all comes down to next week. If he has production that is undeniable, we will be keeping him on the roster and bumping down one of our young backs to the practice squad. If not, he will most likely become one of our roster cuts. But we could then begin to prepare for our final preseason game in which we would be returning home to take on the Bengals. We had a shootout with them last season which we ended up on top of, so we already know most of their roster. As we scan the depth chart, the Bengals possess a very high-powered offense with Joe Burrow at the helm, with the various weapons in hand like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. They have an above-average O-line and some solid pass rush as well, but it's in the pass coverage that their weaknesses lie, with a lot of that responsibility on the shoulders of Chidobe Awuzie. For injuries, Cincinnati will be without the third-year guard Cordell Volson as he is recovering from a broken finger. With that information, we could then set our game plan. Starting on defense, we need to defend the medium pass. We know this is a team that loves to sling the rock, and we need to focus our efforts on not letting them tear us up in that middle portion of the field. And on offense, we are going to focus on throwing it short. We noted their productive pass rush, and if we can get the ball out fast to our speedy receivers, we can allow them to make some plays in space. We then set our game day goals for this upcoming matchup. First, we want to protect the QB and not allow a single sack on the day. A very tough task with a rookie playing the tackle position as well, but with our game plan in mind, we should be able to do it. Next, we want to get 350 or more offensive yards. We know how it unfolded into a shootout last year, and if we want to best them again, we'll need to pick up some major yardage here. After that, we want to allow 20 points or less. Yet another tough task, as this week the starting units will be playing for 3 quarters. But if there's a time to test our defense to see what they're capable of, it's right now. And lastly, we want to get 2+ passing touchdowns. We want to continue to test not only our receivers, but our QBs as well. And we'll have to see how well we can do today. We then went through training for the week, and we did not escape unscathed as we picked up 4 separate injuries before our final preseason game. The good news being all players should be ready for the start of the regular season, so let's go through them. First, Our return man Andre Bocelli is out with a high ankle sprain, and maybe this gives someone else a chance to stand out as a future return specialist. Next, our lead back Tyson Williams suffered a dislocated wrist, and that will give the rest of our backs a true chance to decide who truly deserves to stay on the roster, as we probably need to cut at least 2. After that, receiver Brandon Smith went down with a PCL sprain, and it's very unfortunate, as this was probably going to be his one shot to see if he could prove that we should save his roster spot. And lastly, our trade acquisition Tyreek Stevenson is out with a dislocated shoulder, so now we'll get to see if any other corners make their mark to stay on the roster as well. But it was not all negative, as we did get some development, starting with our first round pick a year ago, Paris Johnson Jr. He is a massive piece for us on the right side, and this week he improved in his awareness, run block against finesse moves. And we then can move on to this year's first round pick, our other tackle, Gary Fordham. He's gotten a lot of tender loving care with Wilkinson helping him along, and he improved in his awareness, run block, and then both pass and run blocking against power moves. And with that, we have discussed everything we needed to for this week. If you guys enjoyed, remember to like, comment, subscribe, turn those notifications down below, and I will see you all next time as we return home to take on the Bengals.